In a quiet village in the eastern part of Nigeria, there lived a young man named Kofi. He was tall, handsome, and strong, the dream of every woman in the village. Kofi had smooth, dark skin that glistened in the sun, and his muscles rippled with every step. His charm was unmatched, and even the mothers in the village would glance at him with admiration when he passed by. But despite all the admiration, Kofi remained humble and focused. Kofi was a virgin, raised by his poor mother, Mama Ngozi, who loved him more than life itself. He was her only child. His father had died when Mama Ngozi was still pregnant with him, leaving her alone to care for the child. She poured all her love and energy into raising him the right way, teaching him to respect women and remain pure until his wedding night. When Kofi came of age, he knew it was time to marry. His eyes had been on a young woman named Amina for quite some time. She was slim, dark-skinned, and very pretty. Kofi first saw her one sunny afternoon when she was on her way to the stream to fetch water. The moment he laid eyes on her, he was captivated. Her graceful walk, her glowing skin. It was as if the universe had stopped for a moment just to allow him to take in her beauty. He swore that she would be his bride, and soon enough, she was. Their wedding day was filled with joy, music, and laughter. People from all over the village came to celebrate. The sound of drums echoed through the night, and the young men and women danced until their feet ached. But the true excitement came when the festivities ended, and Kofi led Amina into his hut for the first time as his wife. Kofi, being a virgin, was eager to consummate his marriage, as Mama Ngozi had told him it was his duty as a husband. But as the night went on, something strange happened. Just a few minutes into the night, Amina screamed and bolted out of the hut, her face pale and her body shaking. "Mama! Mama! He doesn't stop! He rides me like I'm a horse! I can't keep up with him, his energy is too much! I can't satisfy him! He's not normal!" she cried out, her voice echoing through the village. Kofi, confused and alarmed, rushed after her, holding his growing arousal as if in pain. Mama Ngozi, hearing her daughter-in-law's screams, rushed out of her own hut, her face marked with confusion. "Amina, what is it?" she asked, her voice shaking with worry. Amina, panting and out of breath, stammered, "Mama, he doesn't stop. He's too much for me. I can't handle him. He's not normal." Kofi stood there, his face flushed with embarrassment, as Amina threatened to go back to her father's house. Mama Ngozi, still in shock, pleaded with her, assuring her that everything would be fine, that Kofi was just inexperienced, and things would get better with time. Reluctantly, Amina agreed to stay. However, things didn't get better. Each time Kofi and Amina tried to be together, the same thing happened. Kofi would never stop, and Amina was always left in pain. It didn't take long before she couldn't take it anymore. One morning, she packed her bags and went back to her father's house, leaving Kofi heartbroken. The news spread like wildfire across the village. Some of the women pitied Amina, but most of them thought she was foolish for leaving a man like Kofi. They whispered behind her back, saying she wasn't strong enough to handle him. Some of the young women in the village even joked that they could handle Kofi better than Amina. One of these women was Zainab, a tall, bold, and beautiful girl. Zainab had always admired Kofi from afar, and she saw Amina's departure as her golden opportunity. She made it her mission to win Kofi's heart and show him that she could give him exactly what he wanted. She flirted with him at every chance she got, throwing herself at him whenever they crossed paths. Eventually, Kofi noticed her, and it wasn't long before he married Zainab. On their wedding night, the same thing happened. Zainab, who had entered the marriage with confidence and excitement, soon found herself screaming and running out of the hut. "I can't bear it," she shouted, her face flushed with fear. "He's not normal. He never gets tired." Zainab didn't even wait till morning. She packed her bags that night and went straight back to her father's house. Mama Ngozi was terrified. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her son. She had raised him well, taught him to be a good man, but now it seemed no woman could stay with him. In desperation, she took Kofi to a local herbalist, hoping he would have answers. The herbalist examined Kofi carefully, shaking his head after a few moments. He gave them some herbs and assured them that everything was fine. that Kofi was perfectly healthy. Mama Ngozi and Kofi left the herbalist feeling relieved, but deep down, Mama Ngozi wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, rumors about Kofi's marriage troubles spread like wildfire through the village. The women who had once admired him now saw him as a challenge. They whispered that maybe Amina was too slim for Kofi or that Zainab was too big. Some believed they knew better and would be able to handle him. Soon, Kofi found himself surrounded by women, all eager to try their luck. At first, he resisted, but eventually, he saw it as an opportunity to find the perfect match. He continued taking the herbs the herbalist had given him, thinking it would help. Within a few weeks, Kofi had been with nearly all the women in the village, but each time, the same thing happened. No woman could handle him, and one by one, they all left, some in tears, others in fear. The village finally reached a conclusion. Something was wrong with Kofi. Some whispered that he was cursed. The men in the village believed that Kofi wasn't normal and kept their distance from him. Kofi, once the village hero, was now a lonely outcast. One day, Mama Ngozi could no longer bear the shame and sorrow. She decided to take Kofi to a powerful native doctor in a neighboring village. The man, known as Elder Chukwu, was feared and respected by all who knew him. They believed he had the power to see beyond the physical and into the spirit world. When Kofi and Mama Ngozi arrived at Elder Chukwu's shrine, they were greeted by the smell of incense and the distant sound of drumming. Elder Chukwu, an old man with a long white beard, sat in front of a fire, staring into the flames. After listening to their story, Elder Chukwu let out a deep laugh and said, "You cannot rob the gods." His voice was deep and filled with mystery. Mama Ngozi was confused. "What do you mean, wise one?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elder Chukwu turned to her and said, "Do you remember the promise you made to the gods when you were seeking a child?" Mama Ngozi's heart skipped a beat. She had forgotten. Years ago, before Kofi was born, she and her husband had been childless for many years. Desperate for a child, they went to the deity and begged for a son. The priest of the shrine had promised them that they would have a son, but on one condition: they must sacrifice 3 cows to the deity after the child was born. But before Mama Ngozi could fulfill the promise, her husband died. She had been left alone and poor, and the promise had been forgotten. Elder Chukwu looked at her and said, "The deity is angry. Kofi is cursed because you did not fulfill your promise. If you do not act soon, the gods will take his life." Mama Ngozi's hands flew to her mouth. She was overwhelmed with guilt and fear. Elder Chukwu's words hit them like a ton of bricks. They had no choice but to fulfill the promise. The next day, Mama Ngozi sold one of her pieces of land near the stream, a land that had been in her family for generations. With the money, they bought 3 cows and went to the deity's shrine to offer the sacrifice. The shrine priest performed the ritual, and as the final rite was performed, a gentle breeze swept through the shrine. For the first time in months, Mama Ngozi felt a strange sense of peace. "It is done," the priest said, nodding in approval. "The gods have accepted your offering." After the sacrifice was made, Kofi and Mama Ngozi felt a deep sense of relief. The curse, they believed, was finally behind them. But the real test was still ahead, finding a woman who would accept him, love him, and stand by him. Kofi was hesitant at first. He had already been through so much pain and rejection. He had watched both Amina and Zainab, women he cared for, run from him in fear. Mama Ngozi, forever the optimist, encouraged him. "My son," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The gods have forgiven us. You are free now. Don't let fear hold you back. Love will come to you." With his mother's words in his heart, Kofi decided to try again. He went back to Amina and Zainab, hoping to mend what had been broken. He apologized to them both, explaining what had caused the trouble in their marriages and assured them that the curse was lifted. But both women refused him. They had already moved on from the fear and trauma they had experienced, and neither was willing to risk going through it again. Kofi was crushed, but he understood. They deserved peace, and he wished them well. Finding a wife in his own village now seemed impossible. The women who had once pursued him were now distant. Kofi felt like an outcast in his own home, his once bright future now shadowed by the past. Not wanting to give up, Kofi decided to search for love outside his village. He traveled to a neighboring village where he could begin again without the weight of the rumors. It was in this village that he met Adana. Adana was different from any woman Kofi had ever known. She was strong-willed, with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Her beauty was undeniable, her skin was dark and smooth like polished ebony, and her eyes sparkled with confidence. But what truly drew Kofi to her was her spirit. She was brave, not one to be easily swayed by gossip or hearsay. When Kofi first approached her, he was nervous. He had heard that the rumors about his curse had reached her village too. He feared that Adana would turn him away before he even had a chance to explain himself. But to his surprise, Adana didn't care about the stories. "I've heard the rumors," she said, her eyes meeting his directly. "But I don't live by what others say. I'd rather see the truth for myself." Her words were like a balm to Kofi's wounded heart. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt hope. They spent weeks getting to know each other. Adana listened as Kofi told her about the curse, the sacrifice, and all that he had endured. She didn't flinch. In fact, her respect for him grew as she realized how much he had suffered in silence, carrying the weight of a promise that wasn't even his own. When Kofi finally asked Adana to be his wife, she smiled and said yes. The wedding was smaller than his previous ones, but it was filled with joy and love. Mama Ngozi, seeing the happiness in her son's eyes, wiped away tears of joy. For the first time in years, she felt that everything was truly going to be all right. As the night fell and the guests began to leave, Kofi and Adana entered their hut for the first time as husband and wife. Kofi's heart raced. This was the moment he had feared for so long, the moment where everything had always gone wrong. He was afraid that the curse might still linger, despite the sacrifices. He looked at Adana, who smiled back at him with reassuring eyes. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, sensing his hesitation. The night went by peacefully. For the first time, Kofi felt what true love and connection could be like. Adana didn't scream, didn't run away, and didn't fear him. Instead, she embraced him, and they both found joy in each other. Kofi had never felt such relief, such happiness. By the time morning light filtered into their hut, both Kofi and Adana knew they had something special. The curse had truly been lifted, and Kofi was finally free. Word spread quickly that Kofi had found a wife who stayed. The women in the village were in shock. How could Adana, after hearing all the rumors, survive a night with Kofi? Many of them whispered that she must have some secret, some special power that allowed her to do what no other woman could. The village women, once eager to have Kofi for themselves, were now filled with curiosity and jealousy. They gathered around Adana whenever she visited the market, asking her questions and trying to figure out what had happened. Adana would only smile and say, "Love is not a competition. I accepted him for who he is, and he accepted me. That's all." Her words left the women speechless. They realized then that it wasn't about who could handle Kofi, but about finding someone who truly loved him. Kofi and Adana became an example of love and patience in the village. Over time, the rumors about Kofi faded, replaced by stories of his happy marriage. Together, Kofi and Adana had several children, each one bringing more joy into their home. Kofi, once the lonely outcast, was now a proud father, a loving husband, and a respected man in the village. Mama Ngozi remained grateful for the rest of her life. Every morning she would wake up and thank the gods for sparing her son. She never forgot the promise they had broken, and she often told the story to her grandchildren, reminding them that a promise to the gods should never be taken lightly. As she grew older, Mama Ngozi watched her son's family grow, her heart swelling with pride. Kofi had become everything she had ever dreamed he would be: a good man, a faithful husband, and a loving father. And though her journey with the gods had been filled with pain and loss, she was grateful they had shown mercy in the end.